Final Fantasy XIV. This is Square Enix's immensely popular MMORPG that is sort of having a renaissance at the moment. Everywhere I go, I see people talking about this game. And for good reason, because Final Fantasy XIV is amazing, and it really does deserve the success that it's been getting. But I'm not going to be talking about that today. Instead, I'm gonna go full boomer mode and talk about the first MMO set in the Final Fantasy world, released nearly 20 years ago in 2002. And this game is called Final Fantasy XI. In this video, I will be chronicling from the game's development all the way until the end of the first year. Now, did I spend way too much time researching an almost 20-year-old game? Yes, but what else am I supposed to do? Go to class? Oh. Anyways, before we go on, I'd like to ask that you like, comment, and subscribe because it really does help the channel out. Now with that out of the way, let's get into the history of Final Fantasy XI.
It all began with a stone, or so the legend says. In ages past, a sentient jewel, enormous and beautiful, banished the darkness. Its many-colored light filled the world with life and brought forth mighty gods. Bathed in that light, the world entered an age of bliss, until after a time, the gods fell into slumber. That world was called Vana'diel.
Now we are going to start all the way back 22 years ago. Development for Final Fantasy XI began back in November of 1999, which is only a couple months before the initial announcement. On January 29, 2000, Square held a private event called Square Millennium. Here, they showed off the plan for a new service called Play Online and how it's going to tie into Final Fantasy IX, X, and XI. With the reveal of this information, they also showed off that Final Fantasy XI will be the very first game in the series to be an online experience. The initial idea for Final Fantasy XI to be a massive multiplayer game was presented by Hironobu Sakaguchi after moving to Hawaii. While in America, he became impressed by the success of the Western MMORPG scene, specifically a game called EverQuest. Sakaguchi wanted their first MMO to be a way for people from across many different cultures to become one under a game that they all love, which resulted in him wanting Final Fantasy XI to be playable across multiple different platforms like the PlayStation 2 and PC, with an eventual release for the Xbox down the line. This announcement was met with mixed responses. The idea of Square Enix, a company who specializes in single-player RPGs, turning Final Fantasy into an online experience was difficult to comprehend, to say the least. As I stated earlier, they also revealed a service called Play Online, which is a program that would become integral to Final Fantasy XI. Originally, Play Online was used as a strategy site for Final Fantasy IX. It was meant to complement Brady Games and Piggyback Interactive's official physical guides for the game. Now, this resulted in some anger from buyers of the physical guide because they felt cheated out of their money. This little issue with Play Online actually made it to GameSpy's top 5 dumbest moments in gaming. Square initially planned to do the same thing with Final Fantasy X, but they scrapped the idea due to the backlash. Yeah, that was probably a good move, Square. The producer for Final Fantasy XI, Hiromichi Tanaka, stated that it was heavily influenced by Final Fantasy III, which is very prominent at the beginning when you get to choose your class. Due to the advanced hardware at the time, Square was finally able to be ambitious and put everything they have always wanted in a Final Fantasy game into Final Fantasy XI. This resulted in the game costing around 2 to 3 billion yen, which is anywhere between 17 to 25 million US dollars. The PlayStation 2 version of the game required a 40GB hard drive. Luckily, this came with the purchase of the game. As we go from January to March, the PlayStation 2 is finally released in Japan. And just a few months later in July came the release of Final Fantasy X, which is a fantastic game by the way, please play it, or else. Included with your copy of Final Fantasy X was a bonus disc, which gave a look into the process that has been made on Final Fantasy XI. Final Fantasy XI was still in development, of course, so the game looked very rough, to say the least. But it was still appealing to many fans of Final Fantasy XI. Nearly a year after the initial reveal of Final Fantasy XI, finally came the first beta test on December 17, 2001. Beta testers were selected randomly by a lottery and received a beta of Play Online, a beta of Final Fantasy XI, and a service manual binder. For this beta, there were 4 worlds that people were divided into, and these were Chaos, Xande, Golbez, and Exeth. The testers were not able to pick their own world, instead they were placed into worlds depending on when they signed up. As the beta went on, new players were constantly being added all the way from December of 2001 to sometime in March 2002. Now, surprisingly, the beta version was essentially the same as the official release version, but there were still some major differences. Players were able to choose from every race in the game, but customization was very limited. There were less choices of faces than there were in the finished game. I mean, it didn't really matter what face you chose because your character just kinda ended up looking like this. The 6 main jobs, Warrior, Monk, White Mage, Black Mage, Red Mage, and Thief, were all available from the beginning. Players were able to get a sub-job by obtaining an old prophecy from monsters around Juno, which is different from how you unlock sub-jobs currently in the game. During the beta, players' levels were capped at 30, but due to popular demand, it was eventually raised up to level 35. But the monsters in the world did not have their levels adjusted. A strange missing feature to me is that there were no undergarments. And I don't mean that the player was just naked, but when nothing was equipped, instead of having undergarments, the texture for leather armor was used. Speaking of strange textures, there were 3 beastmen, being the Orc, Yagudo, and the Kodav. But name is all they really differed in because they all shared the same Orc model. There were 2 official events held during this beta testing period. The first was called Connor Communique. This event consisted of following a certain hint provided in a link shell conversation to reach a location where a GM would be waiting with their reward. The second event was Demon in the Rye. This consisted of players having to fight a special monster that hid among similar looking monsters, and they could only tell if it was the special one by fighting it and most definitely getting killed in the process. Before I go on to the release of the game, I do want to explain what gameplay was like. When beginning the game, players start by creating a character and choosing from one of the 6 races. These races are the basic Unga Bunga Hume, the Legolas fanboy class, Elven, the class for weirdos, Taru, the big buff boy sexy Galkas, and the class for horny people, Mithra. I play as a Mithra because, yeah. After choosing their race, players had to select one of the 3 starting cities. These options were the Republic of Bastok, the Kingdom of Sandioria, and the Federation of Windhurst. In terms of map design, I really think these maps, while very plain, are actually kind of intriguing. When I play, I usually find myself sitting in Sandioria just listening to its theme. Now let's move on to the questing part. The main storyline is advanced through playing missions that are given by NPCs. These missions all give you items, rank, and allow you to access new areas. Players can also undertake quests. These do not advance the storyline, but they do give you rewards and they enhance your fame. Fame is a status that affects how NPCs in the game react to you. Fights take place in the wilderness. Monsters are found wandering around the land and can be attacked whenever. When starting a fight, you auto-attack, and in between auto-attacks, you can select different moves. These attacks are activated by the player in a menu. Once an attack is selected and used, you have a cooldown until you can use your next action. There are magic spells that have cast timers and require MP, while melee attacks cost TP. I'll be honest, combat in this game is, it's just not fun. I typically find myself just watching Netflix while fighting enemies most of the time. But that doesn't mean it's bad. It's got a certain charm, I guess. Around the world, there are certain enemies called notorious monsters that are rare or sometimes tied to a mission or quest. These enemies can be fought in the open world, but are mostly found in hard-to-access battlefields. Oh, and I hope you have friends, because the mechanics and combat of the game are really built around you needing to group up with other players in order to complete tasks. If you plan on playing this alone, good luck, because if you die to a monster, you can lose experience and possibly level down. In terms of what classes you can play as, there are 22, and they are, I'm gonna go fast here, Warrior, Monk, White Mage, Black Mage, Red Mage, Thief, Paladin, Dark Knight, Beastmaster, Bard, Ranger, Samurai, Ninja, Dragoon, Summoner, Blue Mage, Corsair, Puppet Master, Dancer, Scholar, Geomancer, and Rune Fencer. Now that is a lot, but don't worry because you are not tied down to one job. In fact, you are able to switch jobs whenever you want as long as you're in an area that permits it. Boring combat aside, perhaps the most interesting part of the job system is the support job. This allows a player to augment their character with abilities and spells from other jobs that are half the level of your main job. And I know it sounds confusing, but say you're a level 20 warrior and you set ninja as your support job. This allows you to use all the skills a level 10 ninja has while remaining a level 20 warrior. With all that being said, we can finally move on to May 16th, 2002. This marks the release of Final Fantasy XI in Japan for the PlayStation 2. Included with the launch, there were 20 worlds. Each world was capable of handling 5,000 people online at the same time, which means the game, theoretically, can handle 100,000 players. On release, the PlayStation 2 version was 7,800 yen, which roughly translates to around $70 US. This contained Final Fantasy XI, the Play Online viewer, Tetramaster, and a Mahjong game, which is a strange addition, but moving on. It also came with a massive 288-page playing manual. The first week of sales alone amounted up to 63,958 units sold. But, like all MMO launches, it wasn't all glitters. Even though Square said they can handle 100,000 players online, the game servers could not handle the amount of traffic it was getting. So many people who had bought the game couldn't even play it. Luckily, these issues were fixed 3 days later on May 19th, and free play was extended until the end of June. Not long after the release came the first update. This brought adjustments to treasure and the buying prices of NPCs because scummy players were farming land crab meat that sold for a pretty penny. June 12th, 2002 came the first big version update. This added new features such as the auction house, the screenshot function, and the first notorious monsters. The thief job also saw some adjustments. On June 17th, 2002, the beta testing for Windows users finally began as a new world, Glaciabolus? Okay, who the hell came up with this name? Whatever, this world was made for them. Not long after release, June 25th, 2002 marked a milestone for players. On this day, the first players reached the level cap, which was set at 50 at the time. Shortly after players reached the cap, Square revealed that they plan to eventually raise the cap to 100. On July 2nd, 2002, came the patch from hell. With this patch came major nerfs to classes such as Paladin and Dark Knight. The Dark Knight job action, Last Resort, was nerfed so badly it was practically useless. Another change that ruined this patch was the Provoke nerf. Provoke was made so much weaker that if a White Mage took aggro with a Cure 2, it would take 3 Provokes in order to gain aggro back. On top of this, the patch caused even match mobs to resist elemental magic by 50%. This patch caused an insane amount of backlash, and mail demanding that the patch be reverted rushed in. Luckily, on July 9th, there came an update which partially reversed many of the changes. This week was referred to as Nightmare Week by the Japanese fans. After the hell that was Nightmare Week, finally came the very first public event, Moogles Take a Trip. For only 5 hours, from 8 PM on July 19th until 1 AM on July 20th, players could search for 21 Moogles that were lost across the map. Each Moogle that was found would give the player a point. Depending on the amount of points the player gained, they could either get a bronze, silver, or gold Moogle belt. This was the first event, and naturally many players wanted to participate in it. In fact, there were so many players that it caused the area to become unstable. Despite the issues, this was actually a pretty successful event. The first user event, Bonodori, was held by players on July 29th, 2002. There's not much I can find on this event, but one funny thing I did find was that players danced around using the /panic command. While the event was fun and many players enjoyed it, players not participating in it found it incredibly annoying because it caused server congestion. The next day, on January 30th, 2002, came the very first Vana'diel census, which showed that the average level of players was 10, and most players were actually under level 20. It also showed that 0.4% of players have reached the level cap of 50. On August 24th, 2002 was the second official endgame event. This one was called Exterminate the Beastmen. There's also not much that I can find out about this event, but judging by the name, I'm assuming you guys can put together what they did. The second Vana'diel census came out on September 6th, 2002. The census showed that the amount of level 50 players has increased to 0.8, and only 6.65% of players actually had their advanced jobs. On this day, the level cap was increased from 50 to 55. In order for players to gain access to the higher level cap, they had to complete the Limit Break quest in Defiant Challenge. This quest had players searching for items that are dropped from 3 different monsters. Not only were these specific monsters rare, but the items also had incredibly low drop rates, which caused the quest to be annoying and difficult. In a later update, the monsters were put in different areas and the drop rates were increased. So suck it, original players. Just kidding, don't get mad at me, I'm fragile. The event Chase the Dancing White Shadow started on September 21st and ran all the way until 1 AM on September 22nd. The purpose of this event was to catch white rabbits and trade a moon carrot with it. This will give you a moon ball. Depending on the moon phase, you could either get a rabbit stick, a moonlight wand, Artemis's wand, Selene's wand, or a moonwatch wand. On September 28th, 2002, the players held an event called Castles of All Charge. This was a protest by players who played the monk class because their class was a lot weaker than other melee jobs. The third Vana'diel census came on October 10th, 2002, and it showed that 3.64% of the population consisted of players level 50 and above. With November 1st came the end of the Windows beta test period, and a couple days later, 2 new worlds, Pandemonium and Garuda, were open for said Windows players. 6 months after the original release on PlayStation 2, the Windows version was finally released on November 7th, 2002. The game came with 4 discs rather than a single DVD. The Play Online viewer and Tetramaster was of course included, but the Mahjong game was absent. The price for the game was between 8,000 to 10,000 yen. The first 10,000 people who pre-ordered the game got a small music box that played the Crystal theme. Due to the increasing population, a new world, Cerberus, was opened. On November 26, 2002, came the next level cap increase. Again, in order for players to level up, they had to complete another Limit Break quest. This one was called Atop the Highest Mountains, and it was notoriously difficult to complete. With all of this, we finally arrive at December 25th, 2002. Square had no official Christmas event planned, but tree ants were placed around the world with Christmas lights. And that pretty much marks the end for the game's first year. What started as an ambitious dream from a man with a love for MMOs became a game for many people to meet friends and spend their time on. Final Fantasy XI is still running today, but only on PC. You can get a 14 free trial, and I highly recommend it. So, with that all being said, I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye bye.